In a quiet town nestled between the rolling hills of rural Maryland, there lived a man named Henry. He was a peculiar fellow, known for his meticulous garden and his penchant for solitude. Each day, Henry could be seen tending to his garden with a dedication bordering on obsession. His neighbors often marveled at the variety of plants and flowers that flourished under his care, a stark contrast to their own lackluster lawns. His house was a small, unassuming bungalow, painted a fading shade of blue that whispered of better days. A single light flickered in the window as the evening drew closer, casting a warm glow onto the neatly trimmed hedges. The townsfolk had grown accustomed to Henry's solitary existence, offering polite nods when they passed him on their evening strolls. Some had attempted to engage him in conversation, but his curt responses and furrowed brows usually sent them scurrying away. There were whispers about his past, of a tragic loss that had driven him into his solitary life, but no one knew the truth. The whispers grew louder when children began disappearing, one by one, under the cloak of darkness. One peculiar evening, a young girl named Lilly ventured too close to Henry's property. She had stumbled upon a rare, four-leaf clover in her own yard, and her mother had told her that such lucky finds had to be placed under her pillow to ward off bad dreams. However, Lilly had a different plan. She wanted to share her good fortune with the lonely man who talked to his flowers. She approached the gate, her heart fluttering with excitement, and called out to him. The gate swung open with an eerie creak, revealing a path lined with glowing mushrooms that seemed to pulse in the dim light. The air grew thick and fragrant with an unfamiliar scent, something both sweet and sour that tickled her nose. The plants grew taller, their leaves brushing against her cheeks as she walked further in, her eyes wide with wonder. Henry, noticing the intrusion, turned to face her, his expression unreadable. He was not an old man, but his eyes held a depth of sadness that made him seem ancient. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low and measured. I found a four-leaf clover," Lilly stammered, extending her hand to show him the tiny treasure. "My mom said it's lucky, so I thought I'd give it to you." Henry took the clover gently, examining it with a hint of curiosity. His eyes met hers for a brief moment before he nodded solemnly. "Thank you, child," he murmured. "Your kindness is appreciated." Lilly felt a strange warmth spread through her chest, and she managed a shy smile. "Do you think it'll keep the bad dreams away?" He looked up at her again, his gaze lingering. "Perhaps," he said, his tone enigmatic. "But remember, not all luck is good luck." The girl's smile faltered, and she took a step back. The garden felt less welcoming now, the shadows seeming to stretch and twist around her. Without another word, Henry turned and disappeared into the foliage, leaving Lilly to wonder if she had made a mistake. That night, as she placed the clover under her pillow, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows in her room seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the glowing mushrooms in Henry's garden. The town grew tense as more children vanished. Parents forbade their children from playing outside after dark, and groups of townsfolk patrolled the streets with flashlights and makeshift weapons. The police had no leads, and the local newspaper was filled with pleas for information and warnings to stay vigilant. One evening, Lilly awoke to the sound of muffled cries coming from her window. Her heart racing, she crept to the glass and peered outside, only to see a group of the missing children huddled together, their eyes wide with terror. They were all holding bouquets of wilted flowers, their faces pale and drawn. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized that the shadows moving behind them were not figments of her imagination, but rather the very plants from Henry's garden, stretching and twisting like animate vines. The children looked at her with desperation, their mouths opening to form silent pleas for help. Her mind racing, Lilly knew she couldn't ignore what she had seen. The next day, she gathered her courage and approached Sheriff Thompson, the man who had known everyone in town for generations. She told him about Henry and the strange encounter in the garden. The sheriff, a burly man with a no-nonsense attitude, listened with a furrowed brow. "You stay away from that place, Lilly," he said gravely, "but I'll look into it." The following night, Sheriff Thompson and a team of officers arrived at Henry's house with flashlights and a warrant. The garden was eerily quiet, the mushrooms dim. The door was unlocked, and they found Henry sitting at a table, surrounded by withered bouquets and photos of the missing children. His eyes were vacant, and his skin had taken on a greenish hue. As they approached, he looked up and smiled, his teeth too sharp and his eyes too bright. "They're just playing a game," he said, his voice a sing-song whisper. "They're all just playing a game in the garden." The officers searched the house, their boots echoing through the empty rooms. But the children were nowhere to be found. It was as if the house had swallowed them whole. In the garden, the plants grew restless, their leaves rustling as if in anticipation. And deep beneath the earth, in a chamber filled with the stench of decay, the children lay in a tangled web of roots, their eyes closed and their chests still, as if they were all sleeping peacefully in a bower of nightmares. The townsfolk gathered outside Henry's house, their faces a mix of fear and disbelief. The sheriff emerged, his expression grim, and announced that they had found no children, only evidence of their disappearance. The whispers grew to a fever pitch, and accusations of incompetence and cover-ups began to fly. But Lilly knew the truth. She had seen it with her own eyes. Days turned into weeks, and the search for the missing children grew more desperate. The town was gripped by a fear that clung to the air like the cloying scent of Henry's garden. Lilly couldn't shake the image of their terrified faces from her mind, and she felt a heavy weight of guilt settle in her chest. One night, unable to bear the silence anymore, she snuck out of her house and retraced her steps to the garden gate. It was open, beckoning her with a soft, pulsing light that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath her feet. She stepped inside, her heart hammering in her chest, and called out for her friends. The plants grew taller, leaning in to whisper secrets in her ear as she walked. The mushrooms grew brighter, casting an otherworldly glow that painted everything in an eerie spectrum of greens and purples. And there, in the center of the garden, stood Henry, his hands buried in the soil up to his elbows, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You've come back," he said, without looking up. "But it's too late. They're all a part of the garden now." The earth beneath her trembled, and the plants began to coil around her ankles, their thorns digging into her skin. Lilly screamed, trying to pull away, but the more she struggled, the tighter they held her. "Please," she sobbed. "Please let them go." He straightened up, his hands dripping with a black substance that looked like ink. "Only if you play the game," he said, his smile widening to reveal those sharp, unearthly teeth. The next morning, Lilly was found at the edge of the garden, her clothes torn and her face bruised. The children remained missing, but the town had a newfound terror to focus on. The whispers grew louder, and the accusations grew more pointed. Henry had become the embodiment of their fears, a monster living in their midst. The townsfolk demanded action, and the sheriff had no choice but to arrest Henry, despite the lack of evidence. He was taken away in handcuffs, his garden left to wither without his care. But the night after his arrest, the children began to reappear in their beds, their eyes filled with the same haunted expression that had once haunted Henry's. The town celebrated their return, but Lilly knew that the nightmare was far from over. The garden had not released them, it had only sent them back, changed and forever bound to its dark whims. Each night she heard the whispers of the plants, calling out to her, asking her to come back and play. And each night she would lay awake, clutching her four-leaf clover, wondering if the price of her curiosity had been too high. The garden waited, ever patient, for its next player. And Lilly knew that as long as it thrived, the darkness would never truly leave her town. Weeks turned into months, and the seasons began to shift. The once verdant plants in Henry's garden grew sparse and sickly, as if reflecting the dwindling hope of the town. The whispers of the plants grew faint, but they never disappeared entirely. The children, though home, remained withdrawn, their laughter a mere echo of what it once was. Their parents hovered, fearful of what the night might bring. The trial was a somber affair, the courtroom packed with faces etched with anger and grief. Henry sat impassively in the defendant's chair, his eyes never leaving the floor. The evidence was circumstantial at best, but the town's demand for justice was deafening. When the guilty verdict was read, the crowd erupted into a cacophony of cheers and sobs. In the quiet of her room, Lilly studied the four-leaf clover, now brown and brittle. She couldn't shake the feeling that Henry was not the monster they had made him out to be. The guilt grew heavier with each passing day, and she resolved to find the truth hidden within the garden's tangled roots. One moonlit night, she slipped out of her house and approached the gate once more. It swung open with a mournful sigh, the mushrooms barely casting a glow. The plants lay dormant, as if in mourning. The house stood empty, a shell of its former self. But as she ventured deeper, she heard the faintest rustle, the barest whisper of a tune, carried on the wind. It grew louder, beckoning her to the heart of the garden. There she found it, the source of the melody, a solitary figure, a girl no older than herself, dressed in tattered rags, her eyes glowing with the same light as the mushrooms. She was surrounded by a circle of the largest, most vibrant flowers Lilly had ever seen. Their petals shimmered with a strange luminescence, casting an eerie dance of light and shadow across the girl's face. "Who are you?" Lilly asked, her voice trembling. The girl looked up, and for a moment Lilly saw her own reflection in those haunted eyes. "I am the garden's keeper," she replied, her voice a soft, musical whisper. "I am what you wish to be free from." The revelation struck Lilly like a thunderbolt. This girl was not a creature of the night, but a guardian, a prisoner like the children before her. And she knew that to save her friends, she must face the darkness within herself and the secrets that lay buried beneath the earth. The girl offered her a single bloom from the circle. It was unlike any flower Lilly had seen before, its petals a deep, velvety black that seemed to drink in the light. "Take this," she said. "It holds the power to end the game." With trembling hands, Lilly accepted the flower. As she did, the plants around them began to stir, their thorns inching closer, their whispers growing more insistent. The ground trembled, and she could feel the malicious intent of the garden rising like a tide. "You must be strong," the keeper warned, her eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to span eons. "The garden feeds on fear and pain. You must not let it consume you." And with that she vanished, leaving Lilly alone with her newfound burden. The air grew thick with anticipation, the plants poised to strike. But Lilly stood firm, her grip tight on the black flower. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, ready to face whatever horrors lay hidden in the soil of her quiet town. The garden had a mind of its own, a twisted sentience that whispered sweet nothings and promised untold power to those who listened. But Lilly had seen the truth: the garden was not a source of luck, but a prison for lost souls. Her heart heavy with determination, she approached the house that had once been Henry's. The windows were boarded up, the door hanging off its hinges like a gaping mouth. Inside, she found the room where the children had been held, the walls now covered in a tapestry of decayed blooms. The black flower pulsed in her hand, and she knew what she had to do. With a prayer on her lips, she planted it in the center of the room, where the earth was still dark and moist. The moment it touched the ground, the plants recoiled, their whispers turning to shrieks of anger. The room was plunged into darkness, and the house itself seemed to shudder. Above her, the floorboards creaked, and she could feel the house's very foundation trembling. The air grew colder, and a wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain-soaked earth and decay. The walls around her groaned as the plants outside the house reached in, their tendrils seeking to reclaim their lost power. But Lilly held firm, her eyes fixed on the spot where the black flower had been planted. Slowly, a light began to emerge, a soft glow that grew brighter and brighter, until it was a beacon in the dark room. The shrieks grew louder, the thuds against the windows more insistent, but she didn't flinch. Then, with a final guttural roar, the light exploded outward, the walls of the house crumbling away to reveal the true extent of the garden. It was vast, sprawling out into the night, a sea of twisted limbs and glowing mushrooms that stretched as far as the eye could see. The children lay scattered throughout, their eyes closed as if in a deep sleep, their chests rising and falling with the gentle rhythm of life. The keeper's words echoed in her mind: the garden feeds on fear and pain with the black flower's power. She could feel the plants' hunger, their desperation to keep their captives. But she knew that fear was not the only emotion that could fuel them. With a fierce determination, Lilly began to sing. It was a simple tune, one her mother had sung to her as a child, but it filled her with a warmth that seemed to drive the shadows back. The plants quivered, their hold on the house weakening. The children stirred, their eyes fluttering open to gaze upon the light that now bathed them in a soft, comforting glow. One by one they stood, their faces filled with wonder. The garden's grip on them loosened, and together they began to walk out of the ruins of Henry's house. The plants retreated, their whispers fading to a murmur as they realized that the game was over. The town watched from a safe distance, their flashlights bobbing in the dark, as the children emerged from the garden, hand in hand with Lilly. The sight of them, alive and unharmed, brought a collective gasp of relief, and soon the air was filled with the sound of weeping and rejoicing. The garden lay dormant, its power broken. The whispers of the plants grew faint, and the light of the mushrooms winked out one by one, leaving the town bathed in moonlight. The children were reunited with their families, their eyes still holding the haunted look of those who had stared into the abyss. But Lilly knew that the battle was not won. The garden had a will of its own, and it would not rest until it had reclaimed what it had lost. The keeper had warned her that she could never truly be free of its influence. With a heavy heart, she turned to the children and spoke in a clear, firm voice. "We must not let fear rule us. We must remember the light we found in the darkness, and we must stand together to keep it at bay." The children nodded solemnly, and together they formed a new circle, one of hope and strength. As they held hands, the black flower at their center grew brighter, casting its light over the town like a beacon. The townsfolk watched, their eyes filled with a newfound respect for the girl who had faced the monster in their midst. They knew that the nightmare was not over, but with Lilly as their champion, they had a chance to keep the garden in check. And so the quiet town of Maryland continued its vigil, ever watchful for the whispers in the night. But now there was a guardian among them, a girl with a black flower and a heart of gold, ready to fight the shadows that lurked beneath the earth.